This is the Leckian presented Ariana McVie, Phoebe Cooper, and the team.
Welcome to another edition of Leckie News. I'm Ariana McVie.
And I'm Phoebe Cooper. Happy New Year from the Leckie News team.
This is a special edition of Leckie News, covering the months of January and February 2023.
It's also in two parts due to the large amount of content we have for you.
Part 1 is our special feature, the Leckie Story, which is the history of our school.
We think you'll be fascinated to know how Leckie came into what it is today.
Part 2 will be a report on the celebration of achievement which took place in mid-December 2022.
This is part 1, the Leckie Story, the history of our school.
We now come to the section of the show that I'm most interested in.
I am too, Ariana. It's the history of our school. It still started when we came across an old video of Leckie's history made by former ex-students on VHS tape with a celebration of our long service staff still in memory. We just had to have a look at it.
I had no idea that the academy was so old. The school was built over a 12-month period, with completion in 1939. The school opened on August 28th of the same year. It had to close almost immediately as war was declared September 3rd. The reason for the closure was inadequate air raid shelters. School resumed after the completion of the air raid shelters. There was no official opening ceremony. There was a special opening ceremony June 6, 1940.
The site was formerly part of Dell's Hall Farm. The hall was on Westmead Road. Economic changes in Warsaw led families have to be moved out into newly created rural areas. This caused housing expansions creating new estates such as Fulbrook. This raised the need to provide a new school. Mr. Joseph Leckie, who was a former mayor of Warsaw in 1926, was the force behind the campaign in the council for a new school.
I'm surprised that it was going to be named the Fulbrook Senior School.
Me too, Ariana. In 1939, the Warsaw Council decided to name the new school after Mr. Joseph Leckie, who had died that year after serving the town for over 30 years in numerous positions, councillor, mayor and member of parliament for Warsaw.
Now that the West Block is gone, replaced by the new Keith Littlestone 2 building, many of our viewers wouldn't be aware that the school started with two main identical blocks, connected by a gym, with a number of buildings extruding out onto the yard. This explains why the old library looks the way it is. I'm told it was very confusing for students and even staff to figure out where they were when they had the two original blocks existed. The two blocks were the boys and girls senior schools. No mixing was ever permitted. The gym was shared by the boys and girls, and was the dividing line between what was in effect two schools. They were even segregated on the school yards. I guess at that time that wasn't a really strange thing for them, Phoebe.
I doubt it was. It was the mindset of the time for not mixing the genders. Thank goodness that's all behind us. The schools were combined in 1947 to form a bilateral secondary school, the first of its kind in the country and the forerunner of the comprehensive school. It became fully comprehensive in 1972. Leckie was on the cutting edge of modern education.
There's an interesting story about our very first headmaster. Mr. John McShane was a Scotsman who came to Warsaw as headmaster of St. Mary's, the Mount Catholic school, sometime around 1909. He eventually went into politics, winning the Warsaw parliamentary seat for the Labour Party in 1929. He lost his seat to arch-nemesis Alderman Joseph Leckie of the Liberal Party 2 years later in the general election of 1931. He returned to teaching and became, of all things, the first headmaster of Joseph Leckie Secondary Modern School. What a real-life twist that is, Phoebe.
Who could have seen that happening? I wonder how they got on when they were both alive. If there is a relative watching this, please let us know. First headmistress for the girls' school was Miss Harrison. We haven't been able to find any information or even a photograph of her. If anyone is a relative or knows someone with a lead to her, please contact. Scan the QR code below the link. Both queries use the keyword history.
The war years was another interesting period for Leckie.
It was indeed. It was a complete disruption of the school. I guess for all schools at the time, I had no idea that Warsaw was a target for air raids. The students and staff had to spend hours in the air raid shelters. The boys would look out for enemy aircraft. I wonder if they were fearful for their lives.
I would be, for sure. The boys' air raid shelter was in the west end near the boys' toilets, accessible by a trap down in the storeroom floor. We have a clip of what it was like at that time from a diary written by one of the students.
The 3 years which have elapsed since the opening of the school have been very eventful ones. The circumstances in which we have been living have made a great difference to school life. From August 1940 to December 1940, we had frequent daylight air raids, and we spent a good deal of time in the shelter. Often we had to take our own needlework and other things with us. And on 2 or 3 occasions we had to take the nativity play costumes with us, as we had been trying them on. The school has been used as a centre for the distribution of ration cards. In 1941, the points books and the extra clothing for girls were given out. In 1942, the new ration books, clothing coupons and personal ration books were given out.
It was sad that even now that there were children suffering similar war experiences, such as in Ukraine today. In a way, those war years reminded me of the COVID years we had. Mr. McShane told the boys they still had to do their classes in the area shelters, no matter what was happening. He was very concerned for their education and well-being, very much like our staff today.
That's exactly what our staff would do, Phoebe. It would most likely be a Teams online lesson. I can bet it didn't go well down with the boys. It is sad about the situation in Ukraine. We just have to hope that the powers that be will resolve the issues and that we will all learn from our mistakes. We stand with the fellow students of the Ukraine to end the war. Now check out the reunion picture of former students in the girls' area shelter some years ago.
In 1947, Miss Harrison and Mr. McShane retired. In that year, the boys and girls' school were combined and Mr. R.S. Hawkins became the new headmaster. His deputies were Mr. Hill and Mr. Serstrup. Miss Collinson and later Miss Ray were the senior mistresses.
Mr. Sturrock was a World War II veteran and was awarded the Military Cross for Valour on the beaches of the D-Day landing skid. He eventually left Leckie and went on to Blue Coat School as headmaster. I wonder if the students of Blue Coat ever realised that they had a World War II hero as their headmaster.
That glass eye he had was a dead giveaway he was wounded in action. It was making me curious if there was any famous about our own principal's past. We should interview him again, Ariana.
We will see about that, Phoebe. We'll also never know if we don't ask. In 1952, sixth form was opened. The houses system was introduced in 1947. The houses were named 4 colours and then later changed to 4 local counties. The 50s and 60s saw the school take prominent focus in Warsaw. Leckie was the top school to go to in those days. It became known not only for its academics but also other areas, such as cultural and sports. More in our sports segment later.
We also had our forerunner of Leckie News, the Leckian, first printed in July 1947. It was a news magazine that recorded events of the school.
That's printed on paper to all you young viewers. Hopefully 10 years from now they will be looking at our videos of Leckie News. We should carry on the tradition and use the name, Phoebe.
That's a good idea, Ariana. Let's give it some thought. What do you think, viewers? Let us know by using the QR code below with the keyword history. It was at this time that the drama and music took on a greater focus that made Leckie stand out among the other schools in Warsaw.
In the 1970s, the merger of the Chuckaway Senior School with Leckie took place. Leckie became a full comprehensive school.
With an increase of new students, now to the thousands, expansion work on the buildings of the school buildings began. This saw that the new blocks had been built across the brook, which at the time was just an open end. Buildings for art, science, DT and the sports hall along with the house for the caretaker were built. The merger was completed in 1972.
Around this time, the gym became the old library and the kitchen was built.
What I was very surprised to find out was the music tradition at the time. As was mentioned earlier, Leckie was famous for its cultural activities and this included music and drama. Mr. Ron Lowe, head of music, led a full orchestra and there was a successful concert band led by Roger Civita. The band won prizes in the National School Concert Band in Blackpool in 1975 and even made an album in 1978. A number of those students went on to make a name for themselves in the music industry.
We would love to talk to one of those former students who have done well in the career of their choice. We would also like to hear this album made by students in 1978. Should you have any idea how to contact any of these people, please scan the QR code and follow the link. Use the keyword history.
We would also like to speak with Mr. Lowe and Mr. Civita about the success they had with the Leckie students too.
In 1965, Mr. Hawkins retired. Mr. R. Nicholas was then appointed headmaster. His time in office was short. Mr. Arthur Williams was then appointed to the post. Mr. Williams introduced the first PTA along with the first fundraising event. Mr. Colin Bilby became a member of the first PTA as a parent in the 1950s. Mr. Bilby went on to become school governor and councillor. He served for many years in those positions. In 2001, he was mayor of Walsall. He was a great supporter of the school for many years. This is why a building was named after him, the Colin Bilby Building. It was also the year that saw the school's first student accepted to Oxford University. Philip Podster went on to be quite famous as a writer, psychotherapist, and broadcaster.
Can you imagine, Ariana? He wasn't the only student from the Leckie to be on TV and radio. It seems to me that we're going on the right path of becoming journalists one day too, with examples like Ruth Elliott and Philip Hudson. It was at this time that the school had a new music block. Recognise this building, Ariana?
Hey, that's the Fulbrooks Nursery! So it was part of the school?
That it was. Soon with our story, Mr. Williams retired along with all the deputy heads in around the early 1980s. Mr. Brian Weston was appointed headmaster in 1983. With that appointment came across some familiar names for deputy head positions.
We have Mr. Peter Sidwick and Mrs. Barbara Miller appointed deputy heads. There are other appointments for pastoral positions. It was a complete changeover of the senior leadership team. There are still staff here who still remember Mrs. Sidwick and Mrs. Miller. I can bet even some of our parents will remember them too.
Changes continued to happen when Mr. Keith Whittlestone became headmaster in 1996. Under the leadership of Mr. Whittlestone, the school gained technology status in the year 2000. It was renamed Joseph Leckie Community Technology College.
So I came to the school in 1996, where the school was growing in numbers after a decline, and recognised as the 12th most improved school in the country in that year, and a sparkling Ofsted inspection a year later in 1996. The buildings continue to change with the times, with food technology rooms being created in the old science blocks, freeing up the old domestic science rooms to be converted to bang-up-to-date music suite for the escalation and expansion of musical achievements. The old music block, out on a limb on a public thoroughfare, has been transformed into the new Fulbrook Nursery with greatly increased security. At present, 2 fully equipped computer rooms are in constant use with additional IT support all around the school. But now that we've achieved the status of a centre of excellence in technology, we shall see many more dramatic developments in the near future.
It then became an academy in 2012 and was once again renamed Joseph Leckie Academy. The site was also expanded. This time, the student population had increased to over 1,400. Addition to this site were the Colin Bilby Building, 2009, the Keith Whittlestone Building 1, 2016, and the last new block, Keith Whittlestone Building 2, 2019.
Mr. Whittlestone died in 2020. His teaching career spanned 23 years at Leckie. He was in his 70s at the time of his death, which is really sad. It was noticed that he touched everyone's lives in the school, staff, students, and even the community. He was greatly respected with his love and passion for the school. Mr. Whittlestone attended both Keighley and Birmingham University and taught in Coventry and Greater Manchester before moving to Walsall. He had been a teacher for nearly 50 years.
We also have a clip of an interview we had with Ms. Cook. She's one of the most hard-working teachers I've ever met. Her dedication to teaching and students is amazing, and to have been doing so here at Leckie for over 22 years is just beyond imagination. Welcome back to Leckie News. As you are aware, we are doing our history segment, and so we are here to interview Miss Cook. How are you, Miss Cook?
I'm very well, thank you.
And we would like to start this interview with Phoebe.
Okay, according to your records, you have worked at Leckie for the past 22 years. Can you say what it was like when you first started here?
Yeah, when I first started here in September 2000, there wasn't a CBB that we're sitting in now. There wasn't a KWB1 or a KWB2. And there was the whole of the West End was all the way down to the East End. So the buildings were a lot older than they are now. There were also some classroom mobiles on the yard. So a 6 block down that end, and then there was a 6 block down this end. So it had a lot of old buildings and mobiles. So it's a lot different now with the new developments that have taken place over the last 22 to 23 years. However, what I first noticed wasn't about the buildings. It was about the people. And when I first came on interview, what I noticed was the friendliness of the staff and the students. And I think that has remained the same, although people have changed over the years, for a long, long time. And I think that's what's so special about Leckie, is the people and the students and the community, and it doesn't really matter. The buildings make a difference, but that bit remains the same today as it was when I first came here.
Thank you very much. How long have you been teaching?
I've been teaching for 32 years, so a lot longer than being at Leckie. Okay, I was in industry first for 5 years, and I've been teaching for 32 years. I'm in my 33rd year now.
Can you tell us your most memorable moment at Leckie?
My most memorable moment at Leckie, well, that's a question, isn't it? I've been being here 23 years. I've got lots of memories. One memory, I'm going to talk about 2 or 3, then there's one I think that's most important. So one of the memories I've got is when I took a girls' team to the athletics at Alexandra Stadium many years ago. And they were a very talented group of girls, and we won the Walsall Schools Athletics Championships. And I can still visualise the girls in the relay team finishing down the home straight, and the absolute delight and joy of winning not only the relay but the whole of that championship. I remember every year of the students at Celebration of Achievement picking up awards. I remember my cohorts for psychology going collecting their GCSE or their A-level results on results days, and how fantastic. And I remember those individuals and those comments that they make. I do remember one event. I went down to London one day to do a presentation at a national conference with another member of staff from Joseph Leckie, and I wondered why the underground stopped working, and it was in 2005 when the London bomb went off, and that memory will stick with me for a long, long time, and my colleague at that time. But the one I want to sort of mention, that probably the most memorable, is that when I took a ski trip to Austria, and it's a week skiing with a group of Leckie students, and the awe and wonder that they experienced going to Austria. And it was a very eventful trip. We got delayed on the way down and we missed our ferry. That didn't deter them. And then when we got there, we had a long journey through France and Austria. The wonderful week we had learning to ski, the powder snow. They hadn't seen anything like it, because the snow in the UK is nothing like the snow in Austria. And the memorable days that we had with students learning to ski and the fun in the evenings. And then on the way back, we had a 10-hour delay. We got to Calais, and we had a 10-hour delay because there was too much snow in Dover, so we couldn't go to Dover. There was more snow in Dover than there was in Calais, in France. But they were absolute delight. I've taken many school trips skiing before I came to Joseph Leckie, but I will always remember that trip and those students and the families and the thanks and the gratefulness of those students. There is something special about taking Joseph Leckie students abroad. And that was a really special trip and a really special memory that I will always have. And in fact, you can't see it here, but the picture up there, that top left-hand picture, was the resort that we went to. And I've kept it on my board for over 13 years. That was my memory.
We've already compared the COVID years to the war years. We can't ask Mr. McShane what it was like, but we can ask you. What was your biggest challenge you had to face during those years?
Well, I presume you're talking about COVID years and not the war, because I'm not that old. So I presume that you were talking about the COVID years. And I think that it was a very challenging time for us as an academy. But for me personally, I hope I don't get too upset now, but for me, I lost Mr. Whittlestone, and I know we all lost him, but I'd worked with Mr. Whittlestone for 20 years at that point. And I'd spent more time with Mr. Whittlestone than my own father, because we worked day in, day out as a part of the leadership team. So it was whilst coping with the loss of Mr. Whittlestone, as well as having to lead the school through what was nearly two very difficult years, 18 months. So the challenge was sort of me standing up to being a principal. Had never planned to ever be a principal, didn't want to be a principal. I always said when Mr. Whittlestone retired that I didn't want to be a principal, but it was almost like, well, there wasn't really much choice. We need to get on with it and do it. So keeping everybody safe, trying to get staff and students safe. Obviously, we had to send students home and staff home at one point, and then as we had you back in, well, not you, when you were year sort of 7, weren't you at the time?
8.
Year 7, 8, were you? Getting students back in, making sure they were safe. Online learning and how we started that off, that was completely new to all schools at that point. So we were learning how to do that, and we suppose we just had to get on with it. You didn't have time to think, oh, woe is me, you just got on with doing the job. And I was very, very lucky that I had such a fabulous group of staff to work with to support me in that, both on the leadership team and all the teaching staff. So I suppose it just rose to that challenge, and it was needed. Somebody had to do it, and so it was. Well, this is my school. I've loved this school, and I will need to keep everybody safe and ensure learning was going on. We had those what was called tags and CAGs, the teacher assessed and the academy assessed grades during that time for students. It was a difficult time, and looking back, it was very challenging, but also very rewarding to have to be able to leave the school and take us through that difficult time and then bring us out the other side. Thank you very much.
You're currently Vice Principal of the Academy. How long have you had the role?
Well, I think it was about 2013. I can't quite remember now. I became Assistant Principal in 2005. I remember that because I was Head of PE first when I first came here. And I think it was 2013-14, so nearly 10 years as Vice Principal.
There have been 6 male principals of the school, 7 counting the current principal, spanning 83 years. How do you feel being the only woman to have principal of Leckie?
I feel very proud to be principal of Leckie for that short period of time. You know, I feel that I was proud and honoured to serve the academy during that time. I didn't think of it as a woman versus a man at all. It was just, you know, get on with the job, lead the school, help as many people as you could. You know, try to take the academy through that difficult time into a reasonably good position so that we can take the academy forward into, you know, a new era with a new leader, Mr. Ludlow. I feel that I've learned a lot by leading the school for that period of time that I can then now use to help Mr. Ludlow and the leadership team to take us further forwards. You learn a lot from doing a role. It's quite a lonely job at times, especially during COVID. And you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about the role of being a leader, more than I'd ever known before. But I've now using that to good effect to support Mr. Ludlow, to support the leadership team, to support the staff and to support the students to take us to the next era of hopefully becoming an outstanding school. I think we already are, but we want to have that recognised by Ofsted. And also to further develop the buildings, because we're not finished yet, are we? No. You know, we've got so far, and we still need to fight to complete that knocking down of the old building and hopefully building another extension so that we can completely have a whole rebuild across the site. But yeah, during that 18 months of time, I was very proud and privileged to lead the school, and I think I rose to the challenge, but I couldn't have done that without the support of everybody around me.
That's really admirable of you to say. Another thing I really admire about you is that you're a really strong woman. What advice could you give me to attain a leadership role such as yours?
I think you've got to be dedicated and committed, first of all, to whatever you want to do in life, whether that's leading a school or any other profession. You've got to show that dedication, that, you know, and you've got to enjoy what you do and want to do what you do. You've got to have a passion in it, and I think that's where I know that I have a passion for education, but I also have a passion for Leckie. You know, I've been here for 23 years and I can't see myself going anywhere else. That doesn't mean to say that my previous school I didn't have a passion for that school as well, but you do need that passion, that dedication, that commitment, and I think that I do have that passion. I am dedicated to students, I am dedicated to staff and this school and the community. And I think that's what keeps me focused, and that's whatever you go on to do in life, you've got to have that commitment and passion for whatever it is you do. You also need hard work. You've got to work very hard for what you do. You've got to, if you're going to be successful, you've got to go over and above what everybody else does. You've got to go over and above and go beyond, and that's a lot of time, a lot of effort and hard work, and sometimes that comes at sacrifices to your own family and your own friends at times, but you know, if you believe in what you're doing, then you will be successful. You've also got to tap into the strengths of other people. And I think one of my strengths is that I'm a facilitator. I empower other people to also achieve, and then collectively we achieve together. So it isn't all about me. It isn't all about my leadership. It's how I get the best out of everybody else. And you do that through building relationships, both with staff, that's the senior leadership team and the teaching staff and middle leaders, and building relationships with students. And then together you achieve great things. You can't do it all by yourself. You can't do it on your own. If you think you can, you can't. And that for me, I think is down to my passion, my dedication. I bring people with me. I encourage them and I empower them and facilitate and support them, and collectively each one of those people rises to the occasion, and then together you take, in this case, Joseph Leckie to the next level. So that's how I would say, if you want to be a great leader, learn how to bring people with you, learn how to build relationships with the people around you, and then they will support you, and together that's much more powerful, isn't it, than one person alone.
We've already briefly discussed this, but just for the new students, could you say what subjects you teach or taught?
Well, at this school I've taught PE when I first came here, so the whole range of PE sports, from football, basketball, cricket, athletics rounders, etc., and extracurricular that went with that. But I also taught some geography. Okay, humanities I taught before I came to Joseph Leckie at my previous school. GCSE PE and A-level PE and Sports Leaders Award. And I've taught vocational sport as well. And then more recently, well, in 2005 to 2006, I started teaching psychology, and I teach A-level psychology now. But my areas are humanities-based and sport-based. That's my background. But I love psychology now, so that's where I currently teach A-level psychology.
Thank you for that, Miss Cook.
You're very welcome.
This is Ariana Nakvi with
Preaching.
MP Cooper and Miss Cook, the Vice Principal, signing off.
Leckie News.
It was so brave of her to step up to the plate when Mr. Whittlestone became ill, and then suddenly passed away. It must have been heart-rending to carry on, after working so closely with him for so long. She really deserved to be awarded at the Celebration of Achievement last year, not only for her long serving of years, but also for putting her heart and soul into Leckie. Thank you so much for caring, Miss Cook.
This now brings us to the present with the appointment of Mr. James Ludlow in 2021. He was formerly the principal of the King's Church of England School for 6 years. He was educated at the Aberystwyth University and started teaching in 1995.
We discovered that apart from being a keen runner, as many of us came to know, he also loves playing snooker. That took us by surprise, didn't it, Ariana?
That's true, Phoebe. Although I can't see why we should be. Could it be that we were expecting him to be a triathlete? We already know a few cyclists on staff.
Maybe so. Well, that brings us to the end of the segment. I hope you enjoyed it. It was fascinating stuff. We end part one with that to conclusion. Call it a cliffhanger if you like. This is a pause for us to catch our breath, literally. So join us for part two as the story continues.
Look, Leckie kid, I'm a Leckie kid. Left a lesson to progress with it. Leckie kid, I'm a Leckie kid. And I wish you all the best in it. Leckie kid, I'm a Leckie kid. Left a lesson to progress with it. Leckie kid, I'm a Leckie kid. And I wish you all the best in it. I need to take a moment, close my eyes for a second.
Wait,